Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Los Angeles Conservancy's Preservation Perspectives series. I'm Adrian Scott Fine. I am the Senior Director of Advocacy for the Los Angeles Conservancy, and I will be moderating today's program. This is our first in our series and features Council District 11 runoff candidates, Erin Darling and Traci Park. We bring this program to you to inform and highlight preservation aspects and hear what candidates have to say and their viewpoints on preservation. And so that you are aware, the Conservancy as a nonprofit organization cannot and will not endorse any candidates as part of this series. Briefly about the Conservancy, for those that may not already be familiar, our work at the Conservancy is fundamentally about people and places, and the idea that places help tell our stories in hundreds of diverse communities all over Los Angeles. And we do this work through both education and advocacy and approach it through the lens of managing change as LA is continually growing and always developing. And for our members joining us today, thank you for being here and all that you do. And for everyone else, thank you too. And please consider joining us as a partner and support us in this meaningful work. So today we're focused on Council District 11 and its many historic places and communities contained within, from Brentwood to Venice to Westchester. CD 11 is rich in historic places and neighborhoods, and like all of Los Angeles, face unique challenges through the planning and development processes. We have approximately 400 Conservancy members active throughout Council District 11, and many more doing great work through various community organizations, some of which are joining us today. So let's get started, and I'll outline the plan that we have for the next hour. But first, let's welcome Erin and welcome Traci to the program here. So if you want to go ahead and turn on your cameras. Great, nice to see you again. Thank you so much for being part of the program. So in terms of the layout today, today's program is not a debate, it's a forum. We'll do this through a series of questions developed by us and in part by you. And thank you to all of those that submitted great suggestions and ideas. Through both long form and what we're calling rapid fire questions, each candidate will be given brief but equal time to respond. And to the candidates, we strongly encourage you to watch the timer on the screen, as otherwise we will have to cut you off, and neither of us will like that. So I think you'll see the time will go by fairly quickly. There will be opening, closing remarks by each of the candidates. There are no rebuttals, so we ask each candidate to stay focused on the question and your views on preservation, and always be respectful to one another and mute yourself while the other candidate is speaking. And to each candidate, thank you again for taking part in this program today. We look forward to learning more about you, why preservation matters to you, and the important work that you intend to do within Council District 11. A few minutes ago, we did a coin toss, and Erin will start with initial questions or initial introductions, opening remarks, followed by Traci. You each will have 90 seconds to provide a short introduction. And with that, feel free to begin and start, and I'll turn it over to you, Erin, and then followed by Traci, and then we'll move on to the next segment.
Well, thank you. It's so great to be here. Thank you, everyone, for attending. My name is Erin Darling, born and raised in Venice, attended California public schools, kindergarten through law school, and I graduated Berkeley School of Law in 2008, and I moved back down to Venice and began working at Eviction Defense Network, representing low-income tenants facing eviction at the height of the foreclosure crisis. And so I'm coming to this race from a housing lens, in particular, the need to preserve rent-controlled units and the need to create more affordability, especially in Venice on the west side, where so many people have been displaced. And I feel like just the Conservancy mission is super important in the context of displacement and gentrification and basically keeping people in their communities. And so for me, I grew up for many years on Appleton, blocks from Lincoln Place. And so for me, the preservation of large garden style apartments that I had so many friends who lived there, I used to play in there as a kid, for me is so real, because a neighborhood loses itself when places are lost. And in fact, I will note that Eviction Defense Network, where I first started, was founded by a lawyer, Elena Pop, who was one of the first lawyers to represent the folks there. So I'm just super happy to be here to talk because I think in LA, we just have a huge job to do in meeting this crisis while preserving our sense of community.
Great, thank you. Traci?
I thank you all for hosting this event. It's wonderful to be here with you. I'm Traci Park. I am also running for LA City Council here in CD11. I am a third generation Angelino. My grandparents moved to Venice in the 1960s. My mom actually graduated from Venice High School in 1972. And I've lived in a couple different parts of our district, including Brentwood, Delray, and Venice now for a lot of years as well. The entire West Side is a place that is very special to me. I really appreciate so many of our historic neighborhoods. And living here in Venice, we are particularly blessed with a lot of very rich cultural and historic resources. And I welcome the opportunity to work with the Conservancy and the Commission as we update our community plan and we think about how we're going to incorporate preservation of those wonderful assets in our community into the modern city that many of us want to see built around us as well. I see tremendous opportunities to bring new housing and other amenities to the entire west side of Los Angeles, but being mindful and conscientious about historic preservation is going to be a really important component of that as well. So I look forward to collaborating with you. Here in Venice, we also have our Preserving Public Places Committee.
And that's the time.
Oh man, that goes fast.
Yes, it does. Thank you. And your volume is a little low, Traci, so I don't know if you're able to change that a little bit so we can hear you a little bit better. It's just a little faint. Okay. With that, we're going to now move on to our long form questions. Like I said, we have 6 questions. It'll be 90 seconds for each response on a variety of issues. The first 3 questions, Erin, you'll start, then we'll flip it with Traci, you'll start first, and you'll have an instance where you're back to back, and we'll do the same thing with the next series of questions. So let's start. For the first question is on housing. A majority of LA's existing affordable housing stock, from bungalow courts to courtyard and garden apartments, is contained within older and historic buildings, increasingly at risk through demolition due to growth pressures and proposed new development. How will you prioritize and balance this dynamic within Council District 11? Erin?
Yeah, thank you for that question. For me, it is super crucial that we do not lose RSO units and that we do not lose affordability. So, I mean, I think how I see development is that there has to be a net increase in RSOs and affordability. And so I believe that is just the foundation. And so losing these, especially to say mansionization, where we're losing overall density on a lot is the super grave concern to me. So I really think it's important that we fight to preserve, multi-unit places, especially in the face of kind of big box development that would, at the end of the day, reduce the number of people living in a space. And so, yeah, in terms of tools in the tool belt, it doesn't have to just be conservation, but I think conservation is key. I think I also want to say kind of big picture in this. It's my understanding that under 7% of LA is kind of historic eligible, and so we also know then that the 93% of the rest of the city is a place for other kinds of infill. So I'm a big proponent of affordability and infill to address the housing crisis. But we can also, walk and chew gum at the same time, and that this, 7% or less than 7% of Los Angeles, we preserve it.
Great, thank you. Traci?
Sure, that's a great question. So obviously protecting and preserving our affordable housing stock is going to be a continuing issue in coming years. There's a lot of different components to this and things that we can do to address it. Certainly both Mello and Ellis Act enforcement is really important, ensuring that we are escorting good, affordable, and workforce development to the front of the line. I think it's important that we continue to focus on the regulatory incentives that add more affordable housing stock to our inventory. Over the last 30 years or so, what we have seen is an alarming loss of affordable housing being replaced by more market and luxury rate housing. Of course, that leads to gentrification in neighborhoods and people being priced out of their own communities. I've spoken to numerous small apartment owners on the west side, and the vast majority of our affordable housing is actually owned by, immigrant and minority families, small families. And oftentimes what happens if they're not getting the back end relief that they need, what we see are developers coming in, tearing those units down and building more market rate and luxury rate. I also think we need to take a very hard look at out-of-state corporate developers coming in and buying up our affordable housing stock.
Great, thank you. The next question is focused on a historic place, the Chili Bowl. The current council member for Council District 11 chose not to support the recent effort to designate the Chili Bowl on West Pico as an historic cultural monument. Despite broad community support for keeping this small and rare example of programmatic architecture and building new infill development around, it was demolished and cut up into pieces. How would you have approached this in similar cases that will likely come forward in the future should you be elected? Erin?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an example of LA not honoring its own history, and I think we have these kind of local iconic places. And when I think of Pico, I also think of the Apple Pan. And so, it's the need for LA to constantly reinvent itself cannot mean that we're constantly tearing down these classic institutions. And so, yes, I believe that is an example of something that should have been saved. And I think we have to be mindful. And I think actually right now we're in a place where there's more understanding of the legacy of like iconic places. And so I just think it's a weird test because it's like, what constitutes iconic? But I feel like if you know LA and you could give directions based on a place, like, oh, go to Apple Pan, go to Chili Bowl, and turn left here, like that's a test. And so I feel like when we're talking about these iconic places, we have to preserve them, because I think our own sense of place is sacrificed, when they're gone. And I think overall we can balance the need for creating housing, but not treating LA like a blank canvas. Because at the end of the day, LA is not a blank canvas, and just because people move here, it doesn't mean we start from scratch. And so, yeah, I think it's as a native Angelino, I just think it's important that we preserve these places.
Great, thank you. Same question, Traci?
Yeah, sure. It's a great example of opportunities that, in my view, have been lost. I am a big proponent of working with communities to protect and preserve those buildings, places, and monuments that are so important to our history and our culture generally. I am a big fan of development that maintains and incorporates those historic places and spaces into redesign and adaptive reuse. And it's a shame that something couldn't have been done for the Chili Bowl. I think that it's also really important that the council member get involved early and often on these types of issues to help navigate through the design process and the permitting process, how and to what extent as much of that can be done as possible. And that is something that I am eager to do when I'm elected. I had started to say in my opening remarks and ran out of time that in Venice, we have our Preserving Public Places Committee, which is doing some excellent work identifying locations in and around Venice in particular that are of significance. And as development concerns and the need to address housing and redevelopment efforts come to the forefront, those are the engagements that I'm going to be looking to have in decision making.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the next question is focused on growth. Some Los Angeles residents are concerned about historic neighborhoods being harmed through incompatible new development and efforts to add greater density, prompted in part by recent statewide legislation such as SB 9 and SB 10. Do you support this type of legislation and its intent, and how will you work to address these concerns in the upcoming Venice and West Side community plans? Erin?
Yeah. I mean, SB 9 passed, and now the question is on a local end, what does that look like? And I believe within District 11, it's really important to take a granular approach because we cannot have entire neighborhoods turn into construction sites. But on the other hand, I think we can do kind of smart infill. So everything from ADUs to kind of creating net increase of units, but not taking this kind of blanket approach to entire city blocks. And so I believe, for one, when we're amending the community plan, we have to strike this balance with kind of creating density and affordability while preserving kind of the character of the neighborhood. And I believe we can do that. I think it's not about turning a single family home into like a giant triplex that maxes out the square footage and shades the neighbors. So I think a lot of it is just kind of basic design guardrails. But I also believe that you can't turn, but kind of going back to my theme of not treating places as a blank canvas, is acknowledging that the neighbors who are there, and if anything, making it easier for the community that already lives there to do those ADUs, to do the infill, so that it's not the out-of-state developer. I mean, there's a huge issue of we got to just preserve the ownership that's within Los Angeles.
That's time. Thank you. Traci?
So thanks. And another great question, and add to that as well, the mandate that we hit the state RENA numbers and bring on approximately another 450,000 units of housing across the city. I am not particularly in favor of Sacramento dictating to local communities what they should look and feel like. I am more of the view that those are decisions that should be left to the local level. While that said, I do agree with the intent behind it. I just wish that these were things that we were making more granular decisions about at the local level. I have some serious concerns about SB 9, for example, the lack of affordability requirements, the lack of focus on development around environmentally sensitive habitat areas, high fire risk zones, and things like that. So to the extent that we are going to be adding density, I do agree that, the urban infill and transit-oriented communities are the best and most likely places to get that density online. But as we work on our community plan updates, I think that the historic preservation component really needs to be centered to inform our project review and our planning decisions, as well as the city's longtime goals and obligations to meet those state mandates on density.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're now going to switch and flip. So Traci, this will be your first back-to-back, but you'll go first and then followed by Erin. This question is specifically focused on Venice. Historic preservation has traditionally been on a property-by-property basis, but how can we preserve the heritage of entire neighborhoods like Venice's Oakwood community and its significant Black heritage? Traci?
An excellent question. So again, I think the community plan update process is a really significant opportunity for individual neighborhoods and communities within Venice to have a seat at the table in thinking about the cultural and historic preservation that is going to be important. I am a big proponent of neighborhoods having a say in designing what they want to look and feel like going into the future. And it feels as though many communities in Venice have not really had a seat at the table because of the piecemeal approach that we have taken for so many years. So really getting the community working together and engaged on the plan update, I think are going to be significant components of that. I've already mentioned our Preserving Public Places Committee, which is doing hard work in Venice now to identify specific locations and monuments that are of interest for preservation. Also doing work around ongoing development to ensure that those policy and planning goals remain at the center. So through my office, when I'm elected, there will be a lot of outreach and engagement so that neighborhoods and communities, and there are many of them here in Venice that have that historic and cultural connection, are really being centered as we make those decisions.
Thank you. Erin?
Yeah, look, I grew up in Venice. It was an economically and racially diverse community, and it's not. And the gentrification of Oakwood and that Black and brown communities have been pushed out is what I've basically went to law school to fight against. And I've represented low-income tenants to keep people in their homes, including in Venice, including in Oakwood. And in fact, I know people to this day who are still in their units because of me, because I won their eviction case. And so this is a huge issue. And so what do we do about it? In the face of what we've seen in Oakwood, where a little lot gets developed and there's a big box home and there's a net decrease of people who live there. And so not only then have people been displaced, but then there's a net decrease of people who are actually living there. And this is a huge issue. And so then how do we build what preserves the community integrity, but also preserves the actual density in this place. So, there's a lot of tools, so increasing, the requirement in inclusionary zoning, but also allowing, infill, historic overlay zones, HPOZs. At the end of the day, though, what we're seeing in displacement is this drib and drab, lot by lot loss. And so I'm excited, if elected, to just basically have a more comprehensive approach so that we're preserving a character, but also preserving the people who can live there, and have a much smarter way that we're doing infill, so that we're increasing net density without having the displacement.
Great, thank you. Our next question is focused on cultural significance. The Conservancy is often engaged in places that are culturally significant. What are your thoughts on preserving buildings and places with no architectural significance, yet important to communities for their historical and or cultural value? And it goes to Traci first.
I think that is absolutely essential work. And I think that, some of the small business support, the anchor businesses, is really important for that. Certainly identifying places and locations across the district and all over the city of Los Angeles to protect and preserve those, whether it is in the form of a park, a kiosk, a visitor center, preserving public artwork. All of that is an important component to it. I'll just focus on a few things in particular in Venice that come to mind. The Grand Canal, which has one of the oldest bridges built by Abbot Kinney, is now threatened by a very large development proposed by the council office between Pacific and Dell. And, that was a bridge built by Black, Mexican, and Chinese laborers whose own cultural importance is often overlooked in our planning and design decisions. And I think that's a perfect example of an area that can and should be preserved. It's actually a registered National Historic Monument, but jeopardized by a pending potential development that's now on appeal in the Coastal Commission. So those are the types of issues and places where I would have been involved early and often, and fighting to protect the historic and cultural significance of those locations.
Thank you. Erin?
Yeah, cultural monuments, is a hugely important tool. I actually lived on the canals for 11 years in a rent-controlled place, and so the canals that just themselves, as a historic zone, it's just key and quintessential. But I'm also thinking about in Venice on Lincoln, like the Great Western Hoagie. Classic, local business, and that I think, has benefited from the legacy business program. And so just kind of the way that cultural monuments can work with legacy business programs to preserve, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is a sense of community, because it's not just, individual or, renters and neighborhoods where people are getting pushed out, but a sense of place and actual businesses. So I believe that basically, when we're talking about tools that the city council can use, the cultural monuments is key. But it's also important that it doesn't get abused, because we know that there are valid projects that do have to go forward, and that oftentimes when we're in the push to create real affordable housing, that we're not using things just to stop projects. And so, yeah, I believe there's a huge balance in not having this narrow view of what constitutes historic. So it's not just this pristine old building, because the fact is we've already lost so much of that. So I believe it's really smart to take this kind of larger approach that we're using this tool, of cultural monuments.
Great, thank you. Okay, our last of our long form questions is focused on a current issue, the West LA Civic Center. The West LA Civic Center is an important historic place within Council District 11 for its architecture, civic contributions, and more recent skateboarding connections. It is an identified eligible historic district. While currently proposed for redevelopment with city, county, and private resources, the project presently calls for the destruction of most of the historic buildings, the skateboarding legacy, and the overall loss of the historic district's eligibility. Do you support this plan as currently envisioned, or would you like to see modifications? And if so, what are those? And we'll start with Traci first.
Sure, I certainly am sensitive to the need to redevelop the space and add the housing, but there are huge opportunities to protect and preserve some of those things that you mentioned. Certainly the amphitheater, the skate park, and the historic buildings could be protected and maintained. I would like to see an approach generally that incorporates those elements into the redevelopment and the redesign of that location. I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to do it. I have spoken to dozens of community members that share the concern about the loss of some of those particular elements of the existing civic center. So I am in favor of redeveloping the site. I am certainly in favor of adding the housing, but absolutely, yes, I would like to see those aspects of it protected and preserved.
Great, thank you. Erin, we'll restart the clock.
Sure.
And
yeah. I should start.
Just give it 1 second for the clock to come back on. Go ahead.
All right. So yeah, I mean, growing up in Venice, skateboarding, like this is a classic spot. It's memorialized, I believe, really wonderfully in the film mid-90s. So like preserving the space and making sure that there is a skate park, and having a skate park. The basic point is we cannot lose a skate park. But there's a balance, right? Because we do need to acknowledge that this project, in terms of creating affordable housing, is what we want to see in terms of the amount of affordability and the depth of affordability. I mean, it's almost 50% affordability. So I totally support the housing component because it is helping address the affordable housing crisis. But we can't lose the things that benefits everyone, right? So we have to have park space. We have to have a skate park. We have to have a sense of place and not get lost. So yeah, I think this is an example of the balancing that we have to do, and especially something near and dear like the skate park, making sure that we're not losing these community resources at the same time that the development that is happening has to actually benefit people. And so that's why I believe local government is crucial in making sure that there actually is affordability, that the people who are moving into these places are actually already living in the communities, because we have to basically ensure that the development that's happening is benefiting the people who are living in the community, especially people who are so burdened by rent with rising housing costs.
Thank you. Thank you both for the long form questions. And now we're going to transition to what we're calling our rapid fire brief questions. It won't be that rapid, but rapid. You'll have a shorter amount of time to respond, 45 seconds. So keep that in mind. We've got 5 questions. We're going to, again, alternate the first 2 questions. Erin, you'll start the last 2 questions. Traci, you'll start, and then we'll do another twine cost for the very last question. So let's start again with Erin beginning. The first question is focused on demolition. Los Angeles's current policies do not adequately protect historic places from unpermitted work, alterations, or even demolition. Do you support stronger policies in Los Angeles to make demolishing historic buildings, whether they're designated or not, more difficult, including harsher penalties and tangible deterrence? Erin?
Yeah, I mean, I think demolition is also times I want to say happens when something gets raised. then what is created is also sometimes a big box market rate development that isn't benefiting. And so it's, to me, it's very indicative of the city not doing enough to making sure that what is coming in its place is actually going to benefit the community, especially with the net decrease in units and affordability. So I believe, to answer the question, yes. And it's because it's not just about to halt the demolition, but it's also making sure, because the concern is that the city's just looking the other way and just saying, okay, raise it, as opposed to increasing, density and affordability within the existing site.
Thank you. Traci?
So I think that this question raises actually a lot of different specific issues. So first, with the Historic Cultural Preservation Ordinance, which identifies various categories of buildings that can't be demolished, I think that there is an opportunity to work to update that ordinance with the Conservancy, the Commission, the relevant city buildings, in connection with our community plan update process and the effort to recode LA, getting at our zoning ordinances, to ensure that there is adequate clarity and consistency, as well as transparency to the process, with an avenue for communities to be heard and have a say as well.
Great, thank you. Our next question is focused on priorities and core issues. So Erin, first, what are 1 to 3 of LA's most pressing issues you intend to focus on?
Number one, the affordable housing crisis that has pushed people out of their communities and out of LA, and there's a huge environmental issue with people having to drive an hour each way. And the West Side is that. So we need to bring net affordability. It's not just affordable housing. There has to be a net increase because let's be honest, the state of California has told the city, you have to come up with, you basically zone for 400,000 units. I believe 260,000 of those are affordable. So we have to meet that target, and that has to also include on the West Side so that people who work on the West Side can afford to live here, but we do that while retaining it. So that's number one. I also believe that we have to address the homelessness crisis by smart development. But third, and this is huge, is that we can't just be prioritizing big box development that raises old buildings like beach bungalows in Venice, historic garden apartments. We cannot lose multi-unit places.
Thank you. Traci?
So I'm going to start with the most pressing issue, and of course that is homelessness. And there is no way to answer that in 45 seconds, all the components that are going to be necessary to address that. Certainly getting interim and emergency solutions online as quickly as possible so that folks have a place to go while we work on our build out of affordable workforce and permanent supportive housing. Issues 2 and 3 are environment and infrastructure, and I see those as being very much interrelated. We have an historic opportunity with federal infrastructure spending to bring resources to the city of Los Angeles to improve our transportation systems, add housing, and improve our overall public works and infrastructure in the city to hit our sustainability goals. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, for the next 2 questions, we're going to switch the order. So Traci will be first, followed by Erin. So this is your back-to-back. This question is focused on planning. What is one thing you would change about current planning and development practices in Los Angeles currently? Traci.
Wow, another really tough one that you can't answer in 45 seconds. The Byzantine maze of bureaucracy, the endless delays, the high costs, the uncertainty, all of that adds to the price tag to get new development online in our city. And that really has unfortunately driven a lot of good ideas out of the market. A lot of our local community builders don't even bother in the city of Los Angeles anymore. And unfortunately, we are losing out on some of those great ideas that we're seeing other local cities that don't suffer from those bureaucratic headaches. In my staff, I'm going to have a team dedicated to escorting good affordable projects to the front of the line and holding city departments accountable to get them done.
Thank you. Erin?
Yeah, I mean, what I would change is to make it easier to build socially desirable things such as affordable housing, because right now holding costs, are a huge problem and the delay in getting stuff online. I think we all pay the price, with the affordable housing crisis. But it's important to say, though, that we're doing that. It has to be kind of surgical. Like the development that's happening has to effectively integrate into an existing context. So it's, once again, it's not treating any neighborhood as a blank canvas, but it's integrating new development into this existing context. And so I believe we can do that by, there is a lot of bureaucratic red tape, and we can speed up the process. On the other hand, it's not just red tape for red tape's sake. Oftentimes there's very important, environmental concerns and historic concerns.
Thank you. Next question is focused on the Cultural Heritage Commission and the designation of historic cultural monuments. Will you support historic cultural monument nominations in Council District 11 that received favorable recommendations from the Cultural Heritage Commission? Traci, then followed by Erin.
I'm going to make this really easy for you and not use all of my time. The answer to that is yes. I welcome the opportunity to take your lead and to collaborate with you on those. Thanks.
Thank you. Erin?
Yeah, similarly, short answer is yes. And taking the lead from the experts on this and having projects gone, or rather sites gone through that vetting, I believe it's important to respect that process. And so the answer is yes.
Perfect. We appreciate brevity in terms of this. Okay, the last question before we go to closing remarks. We'll do another coin toss since we have an odd number of questions here. So whoever wants to call it first.
Tails.
Your turn to call it, Erin.
Yeah, tails.
Okay, tails. Ted. So Traci, you're first, and then followed with Erin. I don't think this would be a hugely difficult question for either of you. Question is, Traci and then Erin, what is your favorite historic place in Los Angeles?
Oh my gosh. Oh, probably the Pueblo in downtown Los Angeles. I cannot think of a summer of my childhood that wasn't spent on a field trip there. Absolutely one of my favorite memories as a kid. I certainly do think, though, that just here locally on the west side, the Venice canals is a really historic area of our community that is a great tourist destination. It is really steeped in that cultural preservation and a very special character and community, near and dear to my own heart because I spend a lot of time there. So those are two that come to mind off the top of my head.
Great, thank you. Erin?
Yeah, for me, it's Venice canals. Like, I remember when I moved in and I got a rent-controlled place, I just felt like I made it. Like, as growing up, like being proud from Venice. Venice is Venice because of the canals, and we all know that the amount of canals has actually decreased from the original Abbot Kinney footprint. And so I, having been born and raised in Venice, I'm so proud to be from Venice. That the quintessential thing of Venice is the canals. And like I say, I was lucky enough to live on the canals for 11 years. And I would cross the bridge, and like every day crossing the bridge, I would just like thank my lucky stars that I got to live there and go to sleep listening to ducks, not cars. So shout out the wonderful Venice canals.
Great, thank you both. Okay, we're gonna now go to closing remarks, and we'll start with Traci since Erin started opening remarks. We're gonna give you a little bit more time, so anything that maybe you couldn't get to, we're gonna give you both 2 minutes each. So we'll start again with Traci, followed by Erin.
Okay, well, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. This has been a great discussion, and I really do welcome the opportunity to work with the Conservancy and the Commission and our local community organizations that are already doing this important preservation work. I think, as I've mentioned, how important it is that we are incorporating our historic and cultural preservation into our community plan process, our update process, as well as into the effort to recode LA. I think that as we are looking at adaptive reuse opportunities from downtown all the way over to the west side, there's significant opportunity to take a more holistic approach that incorporates historic and cultural preservation into our planning decisions and our long-term policy goals. I think we also have an opportunity to update our cultural and historic preservation ordinance to bring greater clarity and consistency so that we are operating from a standardized set of policy goals and interpretations to make sure that the system is fair and transparent and balanced, and that we are using the process to protect and preserve those monuments as we look for opportunities to add density and to reuse old buildings for other purposes. I think it's also really important that as a council member, there is adequate leadership on these issues. And I think it's very important for the City 11 council member to be involved early and often. Unfortunately, what we've seen happen all too often is that a dispute has arisen after the sale or transfer of a property. And unfortunately, it's too late in some cases, or it has caused an economic hardship or other problems when the council office gets involved too late. So I'll look forward to being there on these decisions from the outset. Thanks again for having us today.
Of course, thank you. Erin?
Yes, two things you need to know about me. I'm from Venice. I love it. And I'm so saddened by the displacement, but also the cultural erasure. And so it's about preserving buildings and keeping people in their communities. And two, that I'm a housing lawyer. I graduated law school in 2008 at the height of the recession, and I fought to keep people in their homes. And we need to address the homelessness crisis and the housing crisis by keeping people in their homes, but also building affordability. And we can do this, with adaptive reuse, converting motels, just being really smart about how we have a pipeline out of homelessness and inside, but also creating more affordable housing overall. But we can do that density, especially the transit-oriented development, by doing it in a smart way. And it's not just building everywhere. And so, it's building along metro lines, bus lines, closer to freeways, and not just sprawling out. Quite frankly, there's places that we don't have to build. And, like I said earlier, less than 7% of LA is, historic eligible. So there's plenty of other places to build. And so we also have to acknowledge then the tools that we have, in the city. And so for me, it's super important that we preserve a sense of space. And then we could do historic overlay zones. We can do cultural monuments. We support local businesses, legacy business program. And so it's just super exciting to be poised in this position, because quite frankly, for years, I would go around Venice and in West LA just generally and be so frustrated and feel so powerless and feel like the neighborhood didn't have any involvement in it. And so I believe that there's a smarter path that we can balance, effectively creating the housing that we need, but then preserving the sense of community that we all, just is fundamental, that we cannot lose that. And so for me, like the North Star in this is my own experience living down the street from Lincoln Place, having friends there who had been kicked out. And so these are the kinds of places that we need to preserve, because it's about preserving, multi-unit places and a sense of space and place.
Great, thank you. You did it. Thank you both, Erin and Traci. We greatly appreciate you taking part in this forum, sharing your thoughts and ideas about preservation. We learned a lot in this last 45 minutes, and again, appreciate you taking part in this. And I want to thank everybody that tuned in. We will be sharing this program far and wide, not just as part of this live feed, but also through our social media and through our YouTube channels as part of this. So please take a look at that. Everybody that's registered will receive a copy of this program, the recording. Our next Preservation Perspectives program will be next week on Wednesday, August 31st at noon, and feature City Council candidates for Council District 5. Please feel free to join us again if you'd like, or let your friends know in Council District 5 so that they can tune in as well. Again, thank you all that tuned in. Again, thank you to Erin and Traci for taking part in this. We look forward to learning more about you and connecting with you around preservation issues. And again, thank you all and have a good day.
Thank you so much for organizing this.
Of course.
Thanks for having us.
You.
Of course.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.